Hello everyone, and today we're going through a lecture of the fantasy Caro-Kann. So we're going to see a good weapon to use against the Caro-Kann to defeat it. And if you're here from the short or the 15-minute video, it's respectable because this is a long one, a true deep dive. It's not going to be as entertaining, but you will get an in-depth knowledge of how to beat the Caro-Kann. So let's start with how it starts. E4, C6, D4, D5. This is the Caro-Kann. Now in this position, there's many moves white can play. We can play the exchange variation, we can play knight c3, we can play the advance, but the one I'm recommending is playing this move, which is simply to play f3. Now, it's quite a rare move as you can see. It's 3% played in the database of masters, but you can see it's got the highest win percentage. So you might wonder why that is, because typically these moves are slightly inferior to the other moves objectively, but from a human perspective, this f3 move is extremely strong. The reason being, not many people study as much as, like, let's say the advanced or the classical, and yeah, they can get in a lot of trouble really quickly. So let's look at how they can get in a lot of trouble very quickly with some of the sidelines they can play. So first off, the rarest move we're going to cover first, and then we'll get to the main moves after. The rarest move they can play is Queen a5. Pretty much no one plays this move. It's not a very good move. You just develop your knight, and we'll get into variations like this later, but we finish development very naturally. So let's say, for example, e5 in this position. e5 is not a very bad move, but we can simply take this pawn, and we're not really worried. If they take on e4, yeah, f4 is the typical move we're playing here to make this pawn structure solid. And here you have a really good position. I'm not going to get into Queen a5 specifically because this position occurs a lot with the queen on b6. So we'll get to that when we get to that. Another side variation they can play is this, c5. Oh, you take on c5? And yeah, essentially if they want to trade the queens, if they take on e4, you can simply trade the queens, and now they can never castle. You can win this pawn with knight c3. And if they take here, on f3, we can simply take back, and this is really bad for them. Both our knights are developed, kings in the center. You're going to play bishop f4. You might look to play something like knight e5 to go after this pawn. Long castle, and your position is just much, much better. So this is definitely something where white is better. Now, let's go to c5 doesn't work. Queen a5, not great. Let's see another side move they have, knight d7. So this move doesn't really accomplish anything. We play e5 still. And the point is we're transitioning into a advanced structure. But in the advanced structure, they never play this move, knight d7, straight away. So typically they get the bishop out before, and then they play knight d7. So this is quite rare for them, and we can play f4 very quickly. So here we can play c3, and we can play f4, and now we have a really strong center, and we pretty much have a much better advanced French is what we're going for. Bishop e2 comes, knight f3 comes, castles comes, and you have a great position here. Now, that doesn't work either. So knight d7, and now we go to another move. So these are all the really rare moves covered. Now we're going to go to the second most rare move. So in this position, I see a lot of my students get stuck. They're like, I'm not sure what I would play because the knight comes on f6. It's a very peculiar square, and sometimes they go ahead and take this pawn, and I tell them this is really bad. This is the last thing we want. The reason we play f3 is not to trade our e-pawn, because then we won't have the central control. So we can't do this. This is a really bad exchange Caro-Kann with a perfect knight here. I mean, the knight is maybe not ideally placed, but the pawn on f3 is worse. It's a worse inclusion than the knight on f6. So we play the move e5. We push the pawn in, and now the knight typically goes to d7. And the point is we're playing a French defense, but what we're doing is after c5, the standard moves of the French, we play c3. Now what's the difference here? What's the difference between this and a French defense? Because you might say, oh, this looks like a lot like a French defense. Except it's not. It's slightly different to a French defense. So in a French defense, what happens is this. So here we go, knight c3. They go knight f6, we play e5, knight d7. After f4, c5, knight f3, knight c6, you can see the difference. Here we have a pawn on c3, which is a much better inclusion than the knight on c3. So actually, by staying with the fantasy, what we've done is we have this pawn on c3, which is actually really nice for us because we can recapture with the pawn, and the knight can safely develop to d2 after we put the bishop on e3. So this is quite a good opening. I'll just show you a few sample moves. Let's say queen b6, castle, bishop e7 is a common move they play. Here we can get out of the pin after castling. Now knight a3 is given. Knight a3 is fine. Bishop e3 is not great at the moment because this pawn would be a bit under threat. So let's go with knight a3. Knight a3, let's say they play something like f5, knight c2, putting more protection on the pawn. Let's say a5, rook g1, and here we're ready to start an attack. So let's say they play something random, just to demonstrate the plan, g4. They take, rook takes. Now look at this position. If we can get the rook to g2, just to demonstrate the plan, queen g1, and okay, that obviously they're not going to play, but something to demonstrate the pawn. We want to push this f5 break, and here we have a really good position. And just for your reference, if you ever want to know your plan in a position, you can always just play suboptimal moves for your opponent and figure it out. I actually wasn't sure exactly why we went rook g2 before this, but I'm sure there was a reason. But yeah, it doesn't really matter. So this is a great position for us. Beautiful position. So as you can see, knight f6 is not a great move. Essentially, that's it with knight f6. You want to push the knight back. If they happen to go knight g8, now simply you play the same thing. Here you can play bishop d3 first. If they go c5, c3, same thing. Knight c6, knight e2, defending this. e6, f4. It's the exact same thing. Exact same thing. If they take, normally they play queen b6, knight c3, and this is perfect. This bishop finds out how to develop. Bishop e7, bishop e3. Now they bring the knight out. h3, controlling this square. Let's say castles, ready to play f4, f5, and this is very good for us. Let's say they don't play f5. We will slowly just expand this position and eventually play f5. And this will be very bad for them. So you can see your plan is pretty simple in this line. And that will cover knight f6. So pretty good so far. Now we're going to get into the next move, which is... Okay, no, queen b6 is more of a main move. I'll just have to look. So knight f6, e5. Yeah, e5. So let's go to e5. And this one is quite simple. So remember, we don't want to take with this e-pawn. Taking with the e-pawn makes little sense because if you take with the e-pawn, now whatever they do, right, you get this pawn on f3 remaining in your position, and that's not really what you want. Because the pawn on f3 now can't recapture with another pawn, and it kind of just hinders your development. So remember, you always take with the d-pawn. Take with the d-pawn. And typically here they play queen b6, but we'll get to this line in another line. So that's okay. Because this can also occur via queen b6 first and then e5, which we'll look at after. Let's say they play bishop c5, you go knight c3. And here the main move is queen b6. And let's say they play it. This is the only one you really have to keep track of in the fantasy because it's a very strange move order. But it gets back to something we looked at with queen a5. The point is you go knight a4. You deliver a fork to these two pieces. Now you might say, okay, knight a4, they might go queen a4 check. Queen a5 check, sorry. But the thing with queen a5 check is we can simply block it and defend the knight. Now they have some weird moves like this, bishop takes g1, rook takes g1, taking the pawn. But here simply we go bishop f4. I believe here f4 is not as good. But f4 is f4 is fine as well. F4 is good as well because I typically prefer playing f4. And let's say a random move. b4 can come, kicking the queen away, queen c7, queen d8, and bishop e3. And this is a very nice position for us. Queen d2. And in this position, long castle is quite nice. You might think that the queen side is a bit exposed, but soon we're soon just going to expand with g4, f5, f6. And this is going to be pretty bad for them. Pretty bad. Or if not that, then g5 and g6. Let me just demonstrate the point. Let's say this. Here, knight b6 is good. Oh, knight b6. Oh, that's a clever tactic. So knight b6, we take the queen. So they can't do that straight away. Let's say this move. Give up the bishop. This is pinned. We can always play rook d6. And you have a nice positional advantage. Like something I would consider in a position like this. Let's say they do queen e7. After just defending our position a little bit, bishop e2, I would consider a move like rook d6, rook d1, and playing in the center of the board. Let's say this, rook d6, rook d1. And this is a beautiful position. You can see the pressure we have here. So that's how we deal with this bishop c5 line. We play knight c3. Now, nothing else is really tried. If they take the pawn, similarly, we trade the queens. Always don't be in a... Oh, I don't know what I've opened. Okay, don't be in a position where you don't want to trade the queens because you're not... you say to yourself, oh, I want to attack with my queen. But here's a really good idea too. Why is it a good idea? The knight comes out quickly. If they trade the same way as before, now we take back. Bishop will come out. King will come out. This king is in a pretty precarious situation. All your pieces are developed. For example, here simply we can already go knight d4. If the bishop comes to e6, the point is we're chasing the bishop away, and if we're allowed to take it, we will take that bishop. We will take that bishop. Let's say bishop e7, bishop c4, and simply it's already +3. This position is probably not even worth talking about. Long castle, rook f1, this pawn is hanging. This is really bad. If the bishop is allowed to be captured, we take it. Point is now they have an isolated pawn. We have the bishop pair, very good position. Bishop c4, knight e4, knight d6 coming, bishop f4, long castle, beautiful position. Couldn't ask for anything more, if I'm being honest. Just a good position in chess. That's the one thing I want. Yeah, so that covers that. Was there anything else I wanted to cover? Yeah, bishop e4 check, we'll quickly have a look at. This is not very good. We play bishop d2. And the point is we're happy with this trade. This trade doesn't mean anything to us. Knight takes d2. And we have a lead in development. We have a pawn. We have an extra pawn. Don't mind that. We're ready to long castle. And our position is quite good. Here we play the same thing. f4, knight f3. Simply a great position. So nothing much to discuss here. Anytime they play queen a5, we can play king b1 or a3. Here, king b1 should be okay. Knight c5, knight f3. And this is a great position. Okay, moving on. So that's e5 covered. Now let's go to the next main move, which is queen b6. So queen b6 is a favorite of many masters actually. I've encountered this move quite a bit, and it used to give me a lot of troubles actually, because I wasn't sure how to respond to it because it wasn't the main move that was covered. But we'll have a look at it today. We'll have a look at it today. But damn, get your speaking right, brother. All right, let's go. So this is the start of the line. So we play knight c3. The same way against e5 we play knight c3. Against e5 we take, and after queen b6 or bishop c5 we play knight c3. Same way here we play knight c3. What's the point? If they take us, which is more than likely the move, let's say they play knight f6, doesn't make much sense. Again e5, and if you remember from the previous line, we continue on with the same development. Knight f3. The bishop, okay, that's gone. So e6, knight f3. Bishop e7. Here a3. A3 is a nice inclusion because you want to get this bishop out, but if you get the bishop out straight away, this pawn hangs. So the thing what a3 does is it sets up a clever trick. Let's say now they castle, we play bishop e3. Now the clever trick of a3 is if they take it, now knight a4 traps the queen because now the a3 square is covered. So a3 is a nice little trick to know. This a3 trick. So knight f6 is not really playable. e5 is something they can play, but we've covered this in the previous line. So if you are, let's say, making your own database, you would say covered in the previous line. Actually, queen b6 I don't think was covered in that exact order. It was bishop c5. Right? Yeah, but it's the exact same thing. So this same thing is covered in the other line. So now we go back. So e5 we know what to do, we take, and against bishop c5 we do the exact same thing because it's the same position. And that's their main move. If they play a different move, so here they take bishop c5 is really the only move. Let's say they try something else, knight d7. We can just take the pawn. If they try take our pawn on e4, we just take back. And now bishop c5 is not possible, we will take it. After bishop f5, knight d6 check is good. Bishop takes d6. Queen takes d6. They can't take this pawn because I think bishop g5 will be very strong. Or even, oh, this is quite nice actually, e6. Now let's say you ignore, okay, e6 is quite interesting. This line I haven't explored. But okay, let's say they take. Okay, you take, and now the king is quite weak. Yeah, you give a check. Bishop c4, bishop g5. Yeah, this is nice. Very nice. As you can see, that doesn't work. So bishop c5 is the only move. And this goes back to the previous line. Explored on e5. 3, e5. Okay. So that's that move. So now let's go to another move. So queen b6. The main move they have here is e6. So, okay, we'll go through taking. e6 is covered in a different line, so we'll do it then. Let's say they take this pawn. Now, this is important, what we do here. Now, you might think, let's take back. Now, this is a playable move, for sure, we can play this. There's a few lines here, actually, we can play. So, the one I'll go through is, I believe, okay, bishop c4 is a recommended move. And I think we stick to bishop c4. Now, what's the point? We're sacrificing a pawn, but what if they take it? What if they take our pawn? Is it the end of the world? Clearly, it's not. We play knight f3. We have 3 pieces developed. They have a queen developed, which is actually a liability. Now, knight e5 is a threat. Knight g5 is a threat. Let's say they do something random. Knight f6. Now, simply castles. Knight e5 immediately, probably not as good here. Knight e5 immediately, e6, and then castles is also playable. But I like castles first. e6 pretty much has to be played. They play this move here. Yeah, king h1 getting out of this pin first. e6, knight e5, and you have a great position here. Bishop e7, knight f7. Always look for these tactics. King f7. Here, queen h5 wins. g6, queen h3. You attack this pawn. Let's say the knight moves to defend it. Now, bishop g5. You can see every single piece is in the attack. Knight e4 is coming. Let's say something random. Queen h4 or knight e4. And this is being captured. It's just too much pressure on the position. Even rook f1 here. And this is over. So you can see there's a lot of tactics in this position if they're not careful. So let's say they play the move e6 here. Now we castle same way. Knight f6, knight e5. Yeah, you can start with king h1. I always like to start with king h1 typically in these positions, just in case there is any check. So king h1, bishop e7, knight e5, castle, let's say. Because in the previous line, this pawn was not defended. Let's say they castle. Bishop g5, you can see what's happening here. Queen will come to f3, rook will come to e1, knight will come to e4 once we take, and this will be devastation. Let's demonstrate the point. Knight e4 already is winning. Let's say they take, we take. This is hit. Rook e8, rook f7. This is over. Let's say they don't take the knight. Let's say they play... Okay, let's say they go back and defend. We take, and this is going to be bad news. Very, very bad news. Bishop h4, queen g4 is here, and this is over. They can't take, this is pinned, and there is nothing to be done here. Queen h5 actually is better. Yeah, this is gonna lead to checkmate. There's just too many pieces in the attack. Let's say something random. Bishop d3. This is hit. This can't be played. The queen is hanging. Very, very nice stuff here. Okay, that's that covered. So bishop c4, we know what to do. Now let's say they don't play terribly. They don't actually take the pawn. They allow us to take the pawn. Well, typically here they play either bishop g4 or e5. Let's say e5, we take it, knight g4, trying to take the pawn back. And here we take the pawn because there's nothing else really we can do that's better than taking the pawn. We could consider a move like knight f3, but after they take, and let's say we take with the knight, this bishop g4 move comes, or bishop c5, and this is not great for us. We have to block, they can trade it, we have to take with the knight, knight d7. And we're left with an isolated pawn and no attack. So it's better here to take this pawn than to let them take us. This is a good move. Knight g4, queen e2, stopping queen f2. They typically take, we bring the bishop back. They go bishop g4, we play knight f3, bishop d2, and long castle. And this is typically the position we get. We play on from here, we play moves like h3, rook e1, and we play around our isolated pawn and try and put pressure on their weaknesses here. So for example, game can continue something like this. Let's say they take with the knight, bishop h5, something like a3, let's say bishop d7, king b1, and you have a nice position. You're going to play moves like bishop e3, improving your bishop, rook g1, and play goes on from here. So this is if they do everything correctly, which is not guaranteed. So that is that. Now they can play e5 immediately. We'll have a look at that. But here we can take it. Here we take it. Knight d7 and e6. So here we don't want them to take. So we include the move e6, giving them an isolated pawn. And now queen e2 seems pretty good. Knight f6, and we simply just take this. This is quite a good position. Similar to the position we had previously, but now they have an isolated pawn, and this bishop can't move. So it's even better for us. So that should cover, actually, queen b6. I think queen b6 is pretty much done. The only move... So what do we do against the move e6? So against e6, we play the move a3. Now, a3 has a couple of points. Number one, in some positions, it stops the move bishop b4. Number two, a3 gets us ready to develop the bishop to e3 without hanging the pawn. For example, let's say they play bishop e7, bishop e3. They cannot take this pawn anymore because of knight a4, trapping the queen. So this trap always exists. So we play the move a3. Knight f6, we play e5. This is the same thing with the French. But if you notice, we have a very, very similar position to the French defense. Let's go. And if you see, this is actually identical to a position you could get out of the French defense, where they haven't committed the knight to c6 yet. But this is quite a position we're happy to play. This is a position we're happy to play. Simply bishop e3. Okay, I don't know why queen d2 is given there. Knight a4. Queen a5 check. Knight c3. And play can continue like this. So this is... Yeah. So this is something we can play. We transpose here, it says written, we transpose into French. So if they take, we could transpose here into a French. Please don't play queen d2 in this position. I don't know why it's suggesting that. Okay, this has to be the main move. So yeah, we could transpose here into a French defense, but this is a line of the French that we're happy to play. The reason is, okay, knight c3, queen b6, knight b5. Now after they trade, b5, b4, queen takes, queen takes, queen takes. Now it's common knowledge in the French, if you get to an endgame and this bishop is locked in, white is clearly better. White is clearly better. They'll put the bishop on d3, they'll bring the king, they'll play moves like c3 or c4, open up the c file, and this bishop will be locked in. And you have a very nice position in the French, in the endgame of the French. But that's a topic of another video. Now here, if they play knight c6 immediately, instead of the move c takes, now we do have an option to get out of the French. So we can transpose into the French with a move like bishop e3, or we can remove ourselves from the French in case our opponent knows it by playing d takes c5. D takes d5, bishop c5, knight a4, queen a5, and c3. The bishop comes back, b4, queen comes back, bishop d3, knight b6, knight takes, queen e2. And here we have a pretty good position where we have with the bishop pair. The bishop on c8 is still locked in. We have future plans of castling and playing f5, but before castling, of course, we have to play bishop e3. So bishop e3, castles, rook c1 he played just to overprotect the pawn in the game. Rook c8, and you can see it's plus 1.5 here. So yeah, c4, break open the position. Bishop comes in. And here, I think he went for a Greek gift. It didn't work in the game, but he did end up winning the game. So he didn't need to play this. Just simply knight g5, queen h5, and he's winning on all sides of the board. This is what we say is dominant. This is who's that player? How am I forgetting his name? It's like a Karpovian type of position. He used to get positions where he would win on the queen side, the center, and the king side. So his opponent pretty much were just frustrated. They couldn't do anything. That's that type of position. So that's queen b6 covered. Now, next we're covering this move, I believe g6. Yes, g6. Let's get to g6. Now, what do we play against g6? Nothing new. Knight c3, same thing. Bishop g7, now we play e5. Now, what's the point of playing the move e5 here? The point is simple, we're blocking in this bishop. This bishop now is what we say biting on granite. It isn't doing anything important, and e5 supports our plan of playing f4 and knight f3. So e5 is a pretty good move here. Now they have a couple moves. f6 aims to weaken this structure straight away. So f6 can be played. But here we play f4, knight h6, knight f3, bishop g4, bishop e2. Very standard moves. They don't have much space. They can't really do much. Castles, castles, e6. Here, I think knight e1 is given, but king h1 is fine. And here you just have a slight space advantage. Moves like c5 will be played. And let's say we can, at some point we have to take because this pawn structure is falling apart. So we take, queen takes. And now here you just win a pawn simply. And after knight f5, bishop d2, your position is okay. You have an extra pawn. You can consolidate that pawn and go on to win the game. And you do have to worry about some pressure on the queen side and this diagonal opening up. But it should be okay. Should be playable. So you get a pretty playable position in this line. Now let's look at another line. 6e5. Instead of f6, they can also consider the move knight h6. Oh wait, I think we looked at knight h6. No, we looked at f6. Knight h6. Here we play the move bishop f4. Now, bishop f4 can be played. Also, f4 can be played. Bishop f4 is also a good move. Typically, I like f4 in these positions, but this is up to you to decide. If you play bishop f4, it's essentially the same thing. So let's say you get a position like this. Okay, this is getting quite complex, but essentially what's happening is we're attacking on the king side. We have an extra pawn. And now we can just simply consolidate that extra pawn. If you don't want to play like this, I don't really like this way of playing. I would play f4 in this position. And after castles, we can play even bishop e2, knight f3, and play it very standard, the same way we've been playing it. f6, knight f3, bishop g4, castle. You have a pretty nice position. Knight e1 can be played in these positions, and the point of knight e1 is just to trade these bishops off and get this knight to a better square. So let's go knight e1, let's say they take. Knight takes or queen takes is fine. I like knight takes better, so you can play c3. Take with the d pawn. Taking with the e pawn would be a bit of a mistake here because it allows the rook trade. Here we have a pretty nice position. Let's say c5, c3, a5, a4, rook c8, b3, bishop can come out here or here. Knight f5, rook b1, play b4. So here we can't really play on the king side, so we're playing on the queen side. Let's say nothing move. Okay, queen e1 to prepare this, I'm pretty sure. Oh, here the computer wants g4. But eventually we want to play moves like, okay, c5 doesn't make too much sense to me. Or c4 doesn't make too much sense. e5. Knight g3. Ah, and then we get access to this square. Yeah, that's also playable. And if they trade, we just trade and now we have a weakness. So g6 is a better line, but you can see if we play correctly, we can always create some weaknesses on the queen side. So that's pretty much g6 covered. Let me see if there's anything else I want to cover. Yeah, we play e5. Yep. Believe that's it. And you can see here from the database, a lot of good games for white. You just have more space in the position. You can really get your advantage going here. Okay, now let's look at the main moves. The main moves are playing e6 or taking the pawn. Let's look at e6 first. E6 is the main move. We'll look at taking the pawn first. Now this is where this stuff gets exciting. This is where this stuff gets exciting. Now they can take, we take back. And this is where our position really comes to life. They play e5 typically. If they don't, let's say they play knight f6. Here we have a really good move. I actually cover this in inaccuracies. The point is after we take and they go knight f6, we play e5. You can see from the engine, it's already +1. And the reason being knight f6 is not a good move. If you can push a knight away at the start of the game, you probably should. Knight d5, you play c4. Now, what's the point? Now, you have a full center. It's like an Caro-Kann, but it's a worse Caro-Kann because they can't bring this knight to c6. And they haven't played c5, they played c6. So here is a key move we play. We play knight c3. Now, after they play a move like g6, we play bishop e3. I like bishop e3 more. And the point is, in any line, we don't want this knight to come to f3. And the reason being, if we play knight f3 too early, let's say here, it's actually bad for us. Well, it's not bad, but it allows them a quick bishop g4, which we don't want to allow. Because this bishop typically has no prospects in this game. On c8. We play knight c3, and we play bishop e3 before anything else. And then, only then, we play knight f3. And here, we're essentially forcing them. If they play bishop g4 here, it's not as good. Here, we just take back. Let's say castles. h4 is coming, and this attack is going to steamroll them. So maybe let's not go for this for them. This is going to be very bad for them. Let's say they play... Okay, let's say they don't play g6. Let's say they play... Okay, they don't have... Oh, they typically play bishop f5. Knight f3. So only now we bring the knight out when the bishop's committed to f5, so they can't trade it off. Here, simply bishop d3. Let's say they trade, bishop e7. And you can see this is going to be nightmare. A nightmare. Let's say they even castle here. Knight e4 is coming. Knight d6 is coming. Knight f6 might be coming. Knight g5 is coming. Let's say a random move, knight g5. and we're already threatening checkmate. Let's say h6. You have this beautiful knight f6, take, and queen h7 mate. So that's no good for them. And typically, I get a lot of games in this position. Where the opponent takes and plays knight f6. Here, you just play very simply. Bring the pieces out. Let's say they do nothing abnormally bad. You still do the exact same thing. Pieces come out. Here, this is the typical development. Bishop e3, bishop e2, knight f3, knight c3. Here, a typical plan is to bring the queen to e1 to g3. And start bringing your pieces, bishop h6, start bringing an attack on the king side. Queen g3, and this is really nice for us. Take, knight takes, knight d7. Here, we don't want to trade. Say random move. Bishop h6, bishop f6. Rook d1 or rook e1. Pressure here, pressure in the center, pressure on the king side. And we have a nice position here. e5 square controlled. Nice position, no complaints. Now, typically they don't do this. Typically they play the move e5. e5 is the only serious move. We're not going to be looking at any other moves here. e5 is the move, and here we play knight f3. Knight f3 simply defending the pawn. Now, they don't want to take. This is actually an accuracy again. And the point is, if they do this, we play this move. I don't know why the annotations are off. I think I disabled this in the settings. Annotations. Okay. This isn't an accuracy because we play bishop c4 here. What's the point? We gave up a pawn, right? So isn't this going to be really bad? I mean, it could be, but let's say they try and defend. We castle. Sometimes they play this move. They're very clever. They're like, oh, I want to give a check. Okay, sure. King h1. Okay, I'll take this pawn. Already losing. Bishop f7, king f7, we take here. So this is really bad for them. Actually, no, I don't. Yeah, we have to be a little careful about this pawn, but I think it's fine. Yeah, here we can even take the pawn. If they take the knight, yeah, we take here. And if they queen, we just take. Oh, even knight g5 was winning, yeah. Everything's winning. So they can't do that. If they go knight f6, now knight g5. And this is a key point of the fantasy. And you're going to see what happens if they castle. Most people castle here. And here you have a nice move. Bishop takes f7. Rook takes f7. Knight takes f7. King takes. And you have this nice tactic of playing queen h5 and picking up the bishop. Also in some positions you have the move e5 as well, which picks up the knight. So you can choose your... I guess the saying is choose your poison, but here you want to choose your success. You can... What's something that's good? You can choose your grape. You choose your grape, whichever grape you want. Now grape is a bit... It's not like... Choose your... I don't know. Choose your apple. Choose your chocolate. You choose your chocolate. Okay. Here, knight f7 is a mistake, by the way, because of queen e7. If you give another check, king moves out of the way, you don't have anything here. So you want to take with the bishop. Bishop takes is the best. If bishop g4, queen d3, you have the same threat. Same threat. Here e5 is stronger. Yeah, I think why this doesn't work. Rook f7, here, take, and e5. Bishop e2. Okay, they have some strange tactics here. So just be a little bit careful. Here e5 is better. And let's say the knight moves. And now, okay, this is mate, never mind. The knight cannot move. Bishop e2, queen h3, threaten mate, threaten the knight. Knight moves, we give them checkmate. h6, we take the knight. And I think I've had a game actually very similar to this before. And yeah, it's not good for them. It's not good for them, I can say that. So you simply castle. Again, upon knight f6, you castle. You do the same thing. Knight b to d7. Here you can go queen e1. So queen e1 supports e5. And also, the queen can go on g3 or h4. Bishop e7, e5. Here, we trade, queen g3, knight takes pawn. And already this is beautiful for us. Bishop's coming to h6. Potentially checkmates on this diagonal. Knight's on a good square. And this is a sample line. This is really good for us. Here, actually, we can take it. On d5, if knight d5, queen f7. And this is mate. You can actually finish them off with a bishop as well. That's pretty nice. If bishop e6 in this position, you simply just take the bishop. Take the bishop, play knight d4. This is a weakness. Oh, sorry, not knight d4. Knight d4 is wrong. Knight d4 is wrong on account of bishop c5, and this is pinned. You play e5 first. And then you play knight g5. Attacking this fork. This is much better. Much more convincing, and this is winning. Any move, you just play knight f7. If they go here, we take it. Take. You can even take, and give them a fork. This is over. It's over, I say. It's over. Okay. That is that. I only have like 20 minutes left. Okay, I have to go quick. Quick like the wind. Okay. Okay, so let's cover the main line now. Bishop g4. This is the main line, and here I'm not going to go too much in depth. I'm just going to tell you the main stuff to do. Now, you have two moves, c3 or bishop c4. I prefer bishop c4 here. Now, after bishop c4, I've been playing c3 lately. Which is the one okay, both are okay, to be honest. Both are okay. I've actually analyzed both, so let's choose one for this one. Let's go with c3. Let's play the move c3. c3 is the more main line. After c3, we put the bishop on d3, so we have a nice square for the bishop here, protecting this pawn. Knight f6, castle. Bishop d6 comes. We play bishop g5. So bishop g5 is a good move, just getting the bishop into the game. Knight d2, and this is all I want to essentially tell you. Bishop out, bishop out. The queen will come around to g3 in this type of a position, and a lot of times the knight ends up on c4, attacking this. That's essentially it. That's what you need to know of the main line. And this is the main line of the fantasy. Look how nice your center is, and your pieces are all out. This is why I really like this opening. Knight c5, knight d6. Actually, we're following a game here. Even if the queens get traded, you have a nice center. Bishop pair. Very nice position. That's essentially it of what you need to know about this main line. It's not very deep. It's not very complex. You just play c3. And yeah, this is very nice for us. Let's say they play h6 immediately. Just stop bishop g5. Here you can play knight d2, bishop d6 now, and knight c4. So a little move order trick, but this is also something that gets played. And here you can play this clever move knight e3, attacking the bishop, and your knight's on a pretty good square here. Queen c2, castle, knight f5. You have a great position here. Okay, that's enough with that. Let's go to the main line. So yeah, now we move to the very main line, which is e6. Now e6 is a bit of a boring line, and what your French player is arguing, well, they have three moves first of all, of what they can play. They have these three moves. After knight c3, they can either play knight f6, bishop b4, and queen b6. So what do we do in each? Knight f6 is the move that transposes back into a French defense. Now, I would take this opportunity to transpose into a French defense, and this is the reason why. Your opponent has played the Caro-Kann, not the French defense. So they're looking for a Caro-Kann, right? So we're kind of tricking them into a French, where after knight d7, f4, when they play c5, what we do now is, we probably don't want to go into the main line of the French with knight f3. This is the classical Steinitz with knight c6, the line goes so long, bishop e3, a6, and it's just theory on theory, right? We don't need that. What we can do straight away is after this move, And after knight c6, instead of going into this, I prefer going knight ce2 here. What is this move accomplish? This goes back to a French defense, and actually it's called the Gukesh move because this is what he played in the championship match against Ding. He did lose that game, but he was better in that game. He had an advantage, he just got under pressure and lost. So let's look at it from the French side of things. Knight c6 comes, c3, queen b6, we develop. Here we play a3. a3 is a nice move here. Point is to play b4 in the future, and also sometimes a3 stops some advancements from black. b4, take, and here it's quite good for the white pieces. The knight on c6 is superior to the knight on e2, and white is doing quite well. So, yeah, the knight on c6. There is no knight on c6. I don't know who wrote this comment. It would have been me, right? The knight on c6? c6? Oh, okay, yeah. So typically here the knight is on c6. It's served a lot better than the knight is on here. So this is quite good for us. It's just a better version of the French defense, essentially. So that is quite good for us. So we stick to that line for the French. And they have some other alternatives. They have bishop e7 here. Here, g3 is good. I think Gukesh played something like g4 in a position like this. Did he play g4 exactly here? No, it's a different line. But Gukesh also played this line. So that's pretty easy. We transpose back into a French, and they played a Caro-Kann. So we have an advantage here. Just one thing of clarification. The reason, I think it was in the line... Was it in this line, queen b6? No. It wasn't g6, it wasn't e6. I think it might have been queen b6. e6. a3, knight f6. Yeah, here. So here the reason we can go into this French defense structure, instead of playing knight ce2 in this position, is because now the queen is on b6. So we're not getting the traditional French, because in the traditional French, they don't have the queen on b6. So here we can go into this type of a line. So if anyone's curious as to why we do that is why. Okay, let's go back to the last move, e6. They can also play this move, bishop to b4. Here we play a nice move. We have two moves actually. We have bishop f4 and we have bishop d2. I like the move bishop d2 because it sets up some nice tricks. Bishop d2, they can take this and we simply recapture. Bishop takes and we simply take with the queen, and this is a nice position again. We can go c3. Let's say knight f6. Here there's two games for white, both white won. Long castle. And here I think so h4 was played and knight h3 was played. The best move according to Stockfish in this line is, let's have a look, h4. I quite like h4 to play g4, g5. Let's say knight d7, h5, h6 is threatened, so h6 has to be played. Let's say we go knight f2 here, b6, g4, g5, and you just attack. Very standard attack. Black is quite better here. White is quite... I just misspoke. White is quite better here. That is how you deal with that move. You just play bishop d2. Now, after bishop d2, they have also knight e7, knight f6. If knight f6, here we know what to do. e5, f4. And this is the exact same thing. I don't want to go through this again. In this position, particular position, you can play queen g4, which is quite nice, and it forces them to make an uncomfortable situation. They can either play g6, whereupon you'll play moves like knight f3, h4, h5, or if they castle here, which is worse, if they castle here, just knight f3, and now soon you have an attack brewing. Let's say c5, here bishop e3, defend the pawn, knight c6, here queen h3 is okay to play bishop d3. You can also long castle here. He played queen h3, let's say b6, long castle, let's say something random. Okay, here bishop b5 works. Let's not play b6, a6. Bishop d3, f5. Here the computer simply recommends a3, which I think there's nothing wrong with. You just have a slight positional advantage here. Let's say they take, you have this d4 square. For your pieces, simply drop back. You have the d4 square, you can long castle, and you can play this positionally. So that is that move. They can also play here in 97, which is, I would say, their main line. Here, I like a3. a3 is quite nice. The point is you make them make an uncomfortable decision. If they trade, you're very happy with this. Bishop takes and you're quite happy. You can have a look at a game here between two masters. b6. Let's see how this game progressed. e3, knight f3. And you can see what's happening here. Weakness, eventually you're going to long castle, bring the rook to e1. Pile up on the weakness. Or short castle and rook e1. Either way. And yeah, eventually expands on the queen side and he goes on to win this game. And again, upon knight e7, a3. If they don't take, they play bishop f5. Bishop a5, you play bishop d3. And you're playing this very standardly. Castles. Here e5 is nice. Knight d7. f4. And you just, same development scheme. Same thing. Nothing new. So nothing to really memorize. You just get the piece layout correct and you should be good. Good to go. Knight b5, you take. You can see it's the same ideas here. That is that line covered. Now let's go to the final line, which is queen b6. After queen b6, here we play a3. Same thing as before. Ready to play bishop e3. Let's say knight f6. Here we already know the move. So this transposes to the other line. Transposes to queen b6. So we don't need this. Let's say bishop e7. Bishop e3. And this is quite a standard position. Here bishop e2 is good. They pretty much have to at some point play knight f6, and there you play e5. Oh, actually here maybe e5 is not... Okay, computer says it is. I thought this would lose. Oh, but then you take here. Okay, they sacrifice some pieces, but there's no... Okay, they sacrifice a piece for the center, but you're better here. You're just up a piece here. So, that's quite good. Other than that, there is no line really to cover. So knight e7. So here against queen b6, just a3. Let's say knight d7, bishop e3, and it's the same idea. Let's say they don't play knight f6, they play something like knight f8. You go knight h3, knight f2. So here bishop d7, castle, knight g6, queen d2. And you just bring all of your pieces into the game and eventually try and break this game open. Eventually they have to move this knight. Like they can't just delay it forever. And when they do, we play e5. And then the knight goes back. That's a pretty good way to end off the video. And yeah, your position is quite good here. You play moves like f4, f5. Here even b4 is good. You take, open up the queen side for your pieces. If they take, there's already a mistake. Take, and this is coming. So this is bad for them. Yeah. So we'll end it off here. So I hope you guys learned some things of this lecture on the Caro-Kann Advanced and how to play against it. I pretty much covered every line in detail, and you should have a pretty good repertoire now. If you're coming here from the 15-minute video, I hope this explains some lines a bit more, or of course the 90-second short, which doesn't explain every line because you can't explain in 90 seconds. But yeah, that's gonna do us for today. Hope if you enjoyed, like the video. If you have a question, leave a comment. And if you want to subscribe, you can subscribe as well. But it's not necessary. Okay, see you guys another day.